text, or our gospel text, begins, where Jesus is asked about an inheritance. And it reminded me of an old saying, and unfortunately, these days, any saying I remember tends to be an old saying. Thank you for not saying amen. Yes. Where there's a will, most people say there's a way. But there's another old saying, and it applies to this text. Where there's a will, there are relatives and attorneys. Gotcha, Larry. And, oh my goodness, I'm sad to say how true that joke really is, and how sad that is. In the course of our lifetime, even in the brief time of our marriage, Tina and I have known people who found themselves in bitter fights over stuff. Lots and lots of stuff. I did a lot of reading. I tried to, honor you by doing a lot of reading in preparation for the sermon, and some of it is related to the text. And one of the things said in the United States, 1 out of about every 4 persons has a storage unit right now of stuff. Now, some of that could be because they're in transition between houses, but we are a people who collect things and get lots of stuff. As a matter of fact, it is quite interesting how when I'm preparing to give a sermon, how many things seem to fall into place in preparation for that. And in talking with someone, they were talking about having to go in and clean out somebody's stuff. They had passed away. And this particular individual kept everything. And piled on the kitchen table was junk mail from the 1980s. Wow. So we hear Jesus gets a cat call from the audience. Hey, help me out with my inheritance. That probably means that the person that was calling out was a younger child, probably a younger brother, because Jewish law said if you were the firstborn male, congratulations, you win, everyone else loses. And he may be saying, hey, I want in on the action. I want some of this. And it could even be considered that this was another trap set up for Jesus, because Roman law had an entirely different approach to inheritance. And so perhaps this is yet another test to see if Jesus will support Jewish law, or will he come in favor of Roman law so that they can find yet another flimsy excuse of why not to follow him. But Jesus totally deflects the question by giving a parable. And it's an interesting parable because we don't know who it's directed at. Is this directed at the older brother, or is this directed at the younger brother? Or is it directed at you, and is it directed at me? So we hear about this person who has a tremendous harvest, so much so that he needs to build bigger barns. And we immediately say, well, what's so wrong about that? Joseph built bigger barns to store grain. But there is a difference. Joseph, from the Old Testament story of long ago, built bigger barns so that he might protect others, a nation, actually nations, from famine. And so he was not building to save and accumulate for himself, but he was doing so that it might be a blessing for others. I suspect each and every one of us has more stuff than we know what we could do with. And so a practical application today would be begin to go through that, and don't stick some poor soul with it when you die. Because you'll all end up in the dumpster, right? Nothing makes you change and direct things or wade through things than like moving. And I remember at one point in my life when I was going through kind of children growing up and such, the longest we were at any address for the longest time was only 3 years, because it's like the first apartment and then the first house. Well, then you fix up the first house and then sell that and get a different house. And so it was now somewhere in the 2000s. I opened a box in my basement, and what's in this? And the newspaper wrapped around whatever that prized possession was dated 1987. Clearly, I can't live without this, I thought. And I put it back on the shelf. And so I think this parable does speak to us to look at how much stuff do we have, and can we begin to follow a spiritual discipline of simplicity. I have much to learn in that arena, but I will tell you one area that I've actually made progress in, and that was with my cell phone. Because when cell phones came out, I got caught up in that 2-year contract. At the end of the 2 years, you walk in and they act like it's your birthday. They clap their hands and they're like, congratulations, you get to upgrade. And I always upgraded. And I now have an iPhone 6. I haven't upgraded for like 4 or 5, 6 years now. I don't know. But it's like, why do I need to keep spending all kinds of money so that I can look at a picture of a cat? I can be sensitive and live a more simplistic life. And I think that this begins to teach us to begin to think about those things in every aspect of our life. For those of you who Facebook, there is a delightful Facebook page called Becoming Minimalist. I highly recommend that you like that page and look at it. It should come as no surprise that I am a fan of Francis of Assisi. I think if you're looking for a role model for your life, I think 2 very strong contenders in life are John Wesley and Francis of Assisi. And Francis of Assisi was a very wealthy young man. His father was a very wealthy merchant, and he was looking for his child to take over the business. And yet Francis knew that there was more to life. And he couldn't put his finger on it until he felt the finger of God touch his heart. And Francis got it. Oh, did he get it? For to his father's amazement, Francis was in the town square throwing out all of the stuff to the eager crowd willing to take it. And the father publicly shamed and publicly disowned Francis. And Francis responded in a most Franciscan way. He said nothing, and he removed his father's clothing that he had and walked away naked. I suggest that none of you attempt that in Webberville. But the example is clear. I no longer clothe myself in the spirit of accumulation. I will clothe myself in the simplicity of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And we can learn from that. So we must ask ourselves, what can we downsize? What can we do without? What can we share with other people that is sitting in our midst that we're just not using? A story that I read and I've just been itching to tell you is that a person checked into a Benedictine monastery. They are known for their hospitality, and they offered everything that they have to that individual. And as that person was getting settled in and checked in, the head monk said, "Brother, if there is anything that you need, please let me know, and I will be sure to have a monk come and tell you how to live without it." Good words. Good words. But is that all that the parable is talking about, is just the accumulation of stuff? I don't think so. I think that's a good point, but I think that there's still a bigger point. And the bigger question is this, are we rich towards God? The story is told of a wealthy prince was traveling in China, and he stopped beside a beggar, and he said, "Beggar, give me some of your rice." Well, the beggar was just absolutely put out. The prince has more rice than he can possibly know what to do with. So the beggar measured out 3 grains of rice and gave it to the prince. And the prince said, "Thank you. And for these 3 grains of rice, I will in turn give you 3 pieces of gold." And as the prince rode off, the beggar went, "If I had known that, I would have given him everything I've got." He would have been rich to his ruler. Brothers and sisters, are we rich to our God? Or do we just give 3 grains of rice? Some years ago, and daughter Stephanie can attest to this, we hosted some people who lived on literally nothing. And they were missionaries. And as missionaries, they had very little and depended on what people could give them. And they also lived in community where property was shared. And he needed socks. And so he said, "Can you take me to Walmart? I need some socks." And so I took him to Walmart, and the smallest package he could find was a package of 6 socks. And he looked at me absolutely dumbfounded and perplexed, because he said, "I don't need 6 pair of socks." And then his face lit up, and he said, "I know, I can give some away." Unfortunately, my sock drawer does not show that same decision. I have plenty of them. So are we generous? Do we give? Do we look for the opportunity to give? I debated on how I should share this information, and I've decided that I will hold the names back to protect the guilty, and only name names of those who are praiseworthy. I have an article dated April 25th, 2019, from Business Insider that talks about the financial contributions to charity that the 2020 Democrats have made. Now, why Democrats? First of all, there's like 20 of them running for the president's office, so they've released their tax records and have made that public. On the Republican side, Donald Trump is going to be the one running. He has not disclosed his tax information, so I can't share that with you. So don't think I'm trying to make a political statement. It's just Democrats happen to make this information available. But imagine, how much would you give if you had earned $366,000 a year? Well, one candidate last year gave $1,166 to charity. Just 0.3% of his income. Another candidate who earned over $1 million gave less than 1% of his income to charity. Most of the other candidates fall into around 2%, 3% or less. But there are a few candidates who deserve to be mentioned by name. First, going back to the 2012 election, Mitt Romney donated 29% of his income, and Barack Obama donated 22%. And I think that deserves being recognized. And in this year's candidate, someone whom I have no knowledge of, and again, I'm only just mentioning the name because of the good example that they're setting, a senator from New Jersey by the name of Cory Booker had released 10 years of tax returns. In 2018, he made $152,000, and he donated $24,000 to charity, which equals about 15%. Get ready for a joke. Dorothy wouldn't let me post your percentages. I didn't even ask, okay? So, and I don't know. I don't know that. I don't know what those percentages are. But I will say that the average United Methodist gives about 3 to 3.5%, which is well below the standard of what we see practiced by so many people throughout Scripture, of where they cheerfully gave 10% of their income. And so I do think that part of this parable challenges all of us in are we being rich to God, and can we be cheerful in our being rich? If I might speak in aspirations, I would love to see this church be able to support itself. You can't right now. You have to depend on your chicken dinners to support yourself. And I don't think that the public should have to support the church. I think the church should support the church. And I think that our chicken dinners, if we host them, that money should be available for missions and for outreach, and not for us to survive so that we can make more chicken dinners. Ouch, I know. There's a reason why I said that, because I have course of study to go to, so I'll be away for a couple weeks, and I'll need to leave right away after the service. So. But you get the idea that our giving is to be joyful and is to be good and honoring to God. I love a story that I came across of a French aristocrat. All right, I'm going to chase a rabbit one more time. Changing topic. If we look at our year-to-date income versus our year-to-date expenditures, we're fairly close, but we're in the hole. And our average attendance, we have in a year's time about 4,000 people flow through here. A very small difference per person. Now granted, that factors out, but like a difference of about $15 a month would, per attendee, would make a tremendous difference to the budget. So it's amazing how a little bit times, the number. And so maybe our challenge, or as we are downsizing and as we are learning to live simple lives, maybe one of those things is, God, can I give an extra little bit, whatever that is between you and God? And only do it if you can do that as a cheerful giver. This text has often been used as a guilt inducer and also as a scary thing with the person dying. And there is a warning there. But I would rather say, instead of a warning, it's an invitation, because richness towards God brings about richness in life. You may not be wealthy, but it does something in your heart. Have you met somebody that they are so wound up with finances that all you've got to do is read the story Christmas Carol? And when we see what happens with the work of God, joy comes into your heart and you're able to give. So, back to my story. A French aristocrat of the 18th century had a very similar example of, he had a good harvest, and he had a good harvest at a time when economic conditions were awful. There was famine, there was pestilence, there just wasn't a lot of grain to go around, and he had a whole bunch of it. And his advisors came to him and said, "You are so lucky, because supply and demand, supply is low, demand is high. This is the time to sell." And he said, "No. It's the time to give." Can we be that person? I am often moved by the generosity that I see that God works in people's lives. And it brings about a blessing in spirit. I want to add just one kind of side thought too. Sometimes it's not so much about the gift as it is about being in the process of giving, that it's the work that does in your life. And we all, on occasion, encounter who I will call the serial beggar, the person that's always the same person at the same street corner with the same sign. And that creates a bit of a dilemma for me, because I don't want to be one who enables. I want to be one who empowers. I want to be one that creates blessing. But yet, I also know that God has given me many, many gifts with no strings attached. And that when I can freely give a gift with no strings attached, that I am giving in that same spirit of God. And I think that works a holy, that does a holy thing in my life. So there are times that I do give to the serial beggar because I feel that I am following in the footsteps of God. Did God give you a list of what He expected of you to do with this beautiful day? He's left it to you to follow. And so I feel that I can give in that same spirit. So brothers and sisters, let us be rich towards God, for God has certainly been rich towards us. Let us be rich with our love, with our gifts, with our service, our witness, and our forgiveness to one another as we seek to build the kingdom of God. Amen. Amen. Here's one last punchline. I didn't even get out of the pulpit, did I? Don't build a bigger barn, build a bigger table.